So, hello everyone. We're coming to you from the Tilman School of Business at the University of Mount Olive. At Mount Olive, North Carolina, we're just a hop, skip, and a jump from Raleigh, the state capital. And we hope you will enjoy this little session from our strategic management course in the Tilman School's MBA program. And tonight, we're going to hear from a team of scholars who have studied the FedEx Corporation and done a strategic assessment of it. And that will be the topic for tonight's program. And with that, we will bring up the material to be discussed. And there we are. So with that, I will turn the program over to Anna North, who will introduce her colleagues, her teammates, and get this show started. Anna, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rooney. As Dr. Rooney said, this is our strategic management analysis of FedEx, and I had the distinct privilege of working with a great group of individuals. I have Tara Fones, Renee Moore, David Short, and Crystal Wood. So we're going to get started with an overview of the presentation. Just to note, if you want to go forward, Dr. Rooney.
I'm sorry, I was asleep.
Already? It's only just slide one. Okay, just to note, we've had a series of presentations throughout. And the FedEx presentation is a little different from the others because we're not a producer of goods, but rather we're a service provider. Therefore, you'll notice a difference in the amount of detail focused around industry and structure. So I just wanted to note that for the audience. Okay. So an overview of the presentation, we're going to talk about the history of FedEx. We're going to do an assessment, markets, industry and structure, strategy, and implementation. So if we'll move forward to history. And it all began with this man. His name is Frederick Smith. In 1965, he was attending Yale University as an undergraduate, and he wrote a term paper. And in his term paper, he projected a new way of business for air freight shipping. His professor was not extremely impressed with this idea and kind of indicated that it probably wouldn't work. Mr. Smith goes on to prove him incorrect, actually. He went into the military for a couple of terms, and then he came out. And moving to the next slide, in 1971, he bought the controlling interest in Arkansas Aviation Sales and named it Federal Express. Kind of with a background of information, the Federal Express kind of comes from his military experience. In 1973, so 2 years later, he officially began operations. He had 389 team members, 14 small aircrafts. They took off from Memphis that night and delivered 186 packages to 25 cities in the United States. In 1977, I'm just going to go through the highlighted sections. There are some other things, but we're just going to go through the highlighted sections. In 1977, they were a leader in the aircraft cargo deregulation. And this was really important for Federal Express. They were lobbying so that they were able to get changes that allowed the company to use larger aircrafts, such as their Boeing 727s. And this spurred rapid growth for FedEx and allowed them to become what is today's largest all-cargo air fleet. Next, in 1984, they began their intercontinental operations, beginning with Europe and Asia. Okay, our next slide. In 1989, they acquired Tiger International, and this is important because it brought them into the Asian market and made them the largest all-cargo line. In 1998, they acquired Caliper Systems, including several lines underneath that system, which helped them to grow. And then in 2004, we'll talk about this a little more extensively, but they acquired Kinko's kind of to help compete with their competition. We'll talk about their competition, which was UPS, because they had bought some companies. So we'll talk about Kinko's a little bit later. In 2006, between 2006 and 2016, FedEx grew like crazy. They acquired 12 new companies, one of which was TNT Express, which is their latest. It was one of the world's largest express delivery companies. It offered road and air delivery services in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, and the Americas. So this actually expanded their area of service. So moving forward, just couple of key historical events. This is just a timeline that kind of repeats what we just talked about. But one thing we'll talk about in a minute, one of their major competitors, which I want to kind of point out, which is a little tidbit, is, of course, UPS in the United States. And sorry, I know you hear my paper shuffling. I know you'll talk about me in a minute because I'm shuffling my papers. They were actually founded in 1907. As you can see, FedEx was founded in 1971. So there is quite a big significant difference and jump that UPS had on FedEx as a company. There's 63 years difference between the two companies, which I think is significant when you start seeing and comparing the two companies. You'll see in a minute how close the FedEx is coming to the competition of UPS. They began in 1971. It took them 2 years to get operational. From 71 to 83, they made their first $1 billion in revenue, which is 12 years after conception and 10 years after the official operations began. And then between 71 and 84, 11 years after beginning operations, they expanded internationally. So you can see they're a quick growing company. Okay, so the next slide talks about, it shows a breakdown of, in 2000, they actually rebranded and became a global brand. So you can see the breakdown here of the different categories that they broke into, and as well as the new company, TNT, that was latest acquired in 2016. Okay. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of assessment here. The next slide is Abel's model. So who's been satisfied by the service that's being provided by FedEx? We have three major areas: FedEx Express, Ground, and Freight. Our customers are individuals that are not connected with business, so like your day-to-day person, such as myself or anyone else that wants something to be delivered. The majority of their business comes from businesses themselves, which is 97% of their business comes from customers with one or more business. So that's the majority of the work that they do. And they also have some work with the government. They, the United States Postal Service does some deliveries for them. So, and this is across all three categories. The next thing is, what is being satisfied? So for FedEx Express, they are the global leader in express packages. They far surpass their competition. They deliver more than 4 million packages a day. They're located in 220 countries and territories. So for FedEx Ground, they do services to the United States and Canada only, currently. They're second in ground delivery, only the UPS, and they have greater than 7.5 million packages daily. For FedEx Freight, they're the leading provider in the United States for less than truckload freight services, and they do greater than 100,000 deliveries or shipments daily. So how is this happening? How is this being satisfied? For FedEx Express, they have 658 aircraft that are being utilized to be the quickest delivery service. They have greater than 49,000 vehicles, 665 World Service Centers, and in fiscal year 16, they had 26.5 billion in revenue. So for FedEx Ground, we had greater than 55,000 vehicles to help them deliver, 36 hubs. They have done greater than 550 pickup delivery stations, 6,400 third-party retail locations, which is where they can drop off packages, and had 16.6 billion in revenue. So you can see this is their second largest category of revenue. And the last category is the FedEx Freight, and they have more than 20,000 vehicles in this category, around 370 service centers, and had a $6.2 billion in revenue for fiscal year 16. So the next is environmental assessment.
Good evening, everybody. This is David.
Hi, David.
I'll start with the environmental assessment. It's important to note out in a recurrent theme that you're going to see in this presentation that FedEx is a different business from what we've seen so far because it's a complementary industry to the majority of other industries. Hold on a second here. We're going to evaluate economic indicators and basic economics with FedEx. FedEx operates in this is a hard word to say.
Oligopoly.
Oligopolistic shipping services industry with few competitors. Their major competitors are UPS and DHL. They're in the mature stage of their life cycle, which will be discussed later on. Brand loyalty and a low cost of operations is a significant barrier to entry. FedEx relies on stable demand, which reduces the threat of intense rivalry, and any unpredictable economic activity can cause a trickle-down effect for them. All right, revenues for fiscal year 2016. FedEx total revenue was $50.4 billion. Domestic package revenue originates mainly from FedEx Express, which is their largest source of revenue. Speaking competitively, FedEx Express is the #1 in the world for package delivery, where FedEx Ground is #2 in just the United States, where UPS is #1. International revenues, about a quarter, or in fiscal year 2016, 24% of their revenue came from international business. This is kind of disturbing because if you look in the grand scheme of things, that they are really dependent on the U.S. market for their business, 76%. And just as an example, in 2009, 73% of their revenue originated domestically. So domestic operations increase, and they're kind of losing a foothold in international revenue. And as we go through the presentation later, we'll talk about strategies and how they're going to fix that. Their international revenue originates in Canada, United Kingdom, China, Mexico, Brazil, France, and India. What we did differently here was, instead of bunching all the countries or all the regions into one, I think it's important to point out a lot of the areas that they service, since this business isn't producing something rather than providing a service. So let's look at the first slide here, the USA versus China and economic indicators, and the valuation, GDP, purchasing power parity, which reflects the size of the economy. And you can see in, looks like late 2013, how China overtook the United States in GDP PPP. PPP is just as the exchange rate for goods and services, and it differs from country to country, depending on what the exchange rate is, and that varies from day to day, minute to minute. China has increased.
Let me give you just a tiny bit of help here. I know that you know what you're talking about, but just for our audience, purchasing power parity is a means of converting local currencies into a comparable basis, and it's not the same as converting local currency into US dollars using bank exchange rates, which often is done. I read an article in The Economist today that referred to the United States as the world's second largest, as China as the world's second largest economy. And that's because people often simply convert local currency into US dollars using the rates that banks employ to convert one currency to another. Unfortunately, that gives a misleading answer, because countries often manipulate their exchange rates, or the bank exchange rates just don't keep up. In the case of China, China keeps its bank exchange rate low enough to encourage other countries to import from it. But when the conversions are done so that the unit of currency purchases the same amount of goods and services worldwide, you get a different kind of a conversion. And here you can see that China, as David points out, catches the US in 2013, it catches the EU in 2014. And this difference, this wedge, is getting wider now because China's economy is growing faster than the US. So the most important part to remember here is that conversion into purchasing power parity is the fairest way to compare economies. And when we do that, we often get answers that are not the same as those that we see in print. Pardon me for that long interjection, David, but it's a really important item for everybody in our audience, including those who may not even be enrolled in this course, but look at this YouTube video later to appreciate. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Roney. When we look at the graph on the top right corner, this is our GDP PPP per capita, which is reflects the consumption potential of any spending power. China has a relatively low GDP PPP, but has risen over several years. Just in the last 2 years, it's risen 6% and 7% respectively, where the U.S. has just grown nominally at around 1.25% to 2%. The important thing to note about China is that they're kind of in an economic shift right now from being dependent on exports to emphasize greater reliance on domestic consumer spending. So it really truly is an emerging economy. The Chinese government, and this is what makes all this interesting, is the various governments and the geopolitical factors that affect each one of these countries and how they interact with FedEx, is that they have emphasized production output, which is great if they want to grow savings and have a higher GDP. But China has an excess of manufacturing output, and many businesses operate at very thin margins, and many of them are actually unprofitable, according to the information that I've found. But we can always rate China as a growth market because of their purchasing power parity. Unemployment is relatively flat. And the thing you'll see in all these graphs too is you can see when the global recession occurred, you'll see dips around 2007 through 2009, and then the recovery phase. And Chinese population is on a steady growth rate as well. Next slide, please. National savings. China has a lot of national savings. The important thing to talk about with national savings is represents the amount of income left over after subtracting consumption costs and expenditures.
National savings also,
yes,
most people are sometimes are unaware of this, include corporate profits too.
Yes.
Savings, essentially, the amount of savings are retained earnings. So whether they're industrial or consumer, they're savings because, as David says, they're not spent. And what we see is, although there's a decline, just look at the amount of those savings, for instance, compared to the US. There's still a large charge on the Chinese battery.
Yeah, their savings represents how much capital that they're generating, or that the economy is generating, and they're investing it and they're putting it back into industry, since the government wants to be a production king in a sense. And we'll see later too, economies oriented towards consumption have lower savings rates, like the United States, for example. We see ours is pretty much consistent, and it didn't vary too much actually during the recession, probably because we borrowed a lot of money. In the United States, just alone, consumption constitutes around 75% of the economy. When we look at inflation rates are all over the place, but they're projected to pretty much stay in line where they were pre-recession. Imports, goods, and services, and you can see a trend starting in 2010 to where China is more transforming into a consumer consumption society versus import and export society. We can go to the next slide as well. United Kingdom, and we'll just briefly touch on this. Everything is relatively flat. they had the same issues that we had during the recession. You can see the dips. They don't have a lot of valuation in their GDP, PPP. It's pretty much flat, as well as population growth. Unemployment is pretty much consistent with the United States. It'll be interesting to see, though, what happens with this Brexit, the departure from the EU, and how that will affect their economy. I really don't think that the IMF, is where this data comes from, has really reflected that in a way of forecasting.
No, I don't. Well, you're right. That's probably not in the IMF's forecast. As we go through these charts, everyone, ask yourself that really basic question: what is the impact of these trends on FedEx's revenue and profit potential? So in China, we saw a whole lot of opportunity because of growth. We also saw a change in the opportunity because, as David points out, whereas this has been an industrial economy in the past and still is, with all that capital being generated, the Chinese government is attempting to shift the economy to a consumer economy so that it can keep growing. Now, when we look at the UK, we don't see nearly that size of opportunity, whether we're talking about the size of the GDP or the one thing that is good is the growth in GDP per capita. But nevertheless, there's a whole lot of difference between what's going on in Europe and what's going on in China.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We'll talk about it more in a further slides when we get to Brazil and Mexico. But unemployment, as you can see, it's pretty much close to the rate is pretty much in line with what the United States does. But unemployment indicates people's or consumers' ability to spend on discretionary items, and that's the bulk of what FedEx does. They deliver goods, manufactured goods, small packages, and also geopolitical factors it can affect the rate of unemployment. In previous presentations, you see a lot of companies interact with Russia. FedEx, not so much, but factors over there. Another example would be North Korea. If they operated there, you would see where they would lose money in those markets because of embargoes and sanctions, because we're not shipping goods in and they're not shipping goods out effectively. But we can go on to the next slide. National savings, pretty much in line with the United States, as well as inflation and import and exports of goods. You can actually see the interesting thing about imports, goods, service is how it looks like forecasted that the UK is surpassing in 2021 the amount of goods that they're importing to their country. And that's hard to pin it on what it's going to be, but I think that may be part of the Brexit equation, that manufacturing may be down in that country, or they might not have the national savings or the capital to invest in manufacturing, so they're going to be more reliable on exports or imports, I'm sorry. Canada, pretty much a flat economy. They don't do that much. Unemployment is relatively high. I was kind of surprised looking at this, that how they tapped into fracking and natural gas and the sand into petroleum market, that they haven't employed more workers in those fields. But everything is relatively flat. You can see how the recession affected unemployment in 2007 through 2009.
Yeah, what has really impacted Canada's economy, of course, is the decline in the price of oil. And while oil was up around $200 a barrel, and that was wonderful for Canada. Yes. And as you said, the tar sands there. But with oil prices having come down to about $50 a barrel, I just came back from Calgary, Alberta, which is the hard oil patch in Canada, and I can tell you that economy has really been impacted. Somebody out there does not have your microphone muted, and you're scratching things over your microphone, and we all hear it, so please be careful. Okay, you want me to change the slide, David?
Yes. In Canada, again, national savings, they actually do have quite a bit of national savings, so what's rest reserved to drive the economy, but they really don't have any any, I wouldn't say oomph to invest that into doing anything. And again, probably a good bulk of their economy is fossil fuels. And just like you said when we were talking about the previous slide, that impact of the price of a barrel of oil being around $50 has really impacted their economy. So it's not going to grow unless consumption increases or OPEC puts embargoes on Asian oil. That's the only thing that might be a saving grace for them.
For those in Canada who are watching this YouTube and starting to throw things at the screen, let it be known that British Columbia on the west coast of Canada is a real growth capital with a whole lot of technology and a whole lot of new things happening. We see some of that going on in Ontario as well. And there's quite an effort now in Canada to get growth from new sources. India
is a great emerging market for FedEx. They have a lot of good things going for them right now. The GDP PPP per capita is very low in India, though. There's a large inequality that exists in India. Nearly 90% of wealth is owned by 2 to 3% of the population. So if India has a decrease in population, whether it be people moving out of the country, famine, disease, it's going to affect the poor, and growth would not be equitable among all sections of their society. So their consumption potential is really, really low when you compare it to the United States. However, when you look at the valuation, that their economy is growing very, very fast. In fact, even faster, faster than what it is in China right now. And
India is expected to be. Somebody said the other night in one of our presentations that China is the growth story of the present, and India is the growth story of the future.
Yes.
That the rate of growth in, as David points out, in India's GDP, when we do it the right way with purchasing power parity, exceeds the growth rate in China. And that will continue as China's economy, becomes more mature and therefore begins to reach some limits of growth potential. Another rather, I don't know whether it's interesting or troublesome aspect of India is the population, which today is about the same size as China, but while China is because of the one-child policy and various other purposes, it's sort of flattening out. It looks like India is going to reach, today it's about 1.3 billion. Projections have it up into the neighborhood of 1.7 billion before it begins to flatten out. So they're going to have a whole lot of people to do something there.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you look at the forecasting, which will be several slides away, you'll see how the actual population is forecasted in just 2020 to surpass China. Yeah. And you're right, with the one-child policy, another thing in China that people are becoming more mobile. They're not sitting at home and making babies. They're kind of like doing what they do in Japan. They're moving to urban centers away from the country and trying to live a Western lifestyle.
Yeah. Again, let's ask the question. What's the relevance of this to FedEx's potential? And whatever your answer might be, you've got to be thinking that in the future the potential is even bigger than it is today.
The IMF does not have unemployment data for India, probably because they don't trust it, or this stuff.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
But other sources, unofficial sources, such as some financial websites, has it listed around 5% as a forecast into 2021. And we talked about the population good. National savings, India has a lot of capital savings invested to grow their economy. It has a lot of potential, and this is something that FedEx really has to pay attention to, especially for future growth. A high rate of growth. Let's look at inflation here. Inflation is still is still very high in India, so their dollar doesn't go as far as it would. You have to exchange the currency rate. And But they have a high growth rate, and with that they can absorb a higher rate of inflation. Their inflation target is around 4%. As you can see in the projections past 2017, it stays right around the 4% mark. But just recently, I mean, it's around 6%, so it's pretty high inflation. And what's interesting, you can see how inflation, when you put it in this slide, you really don't see it in the other slides, how the inflation rate is escalating in the United States. And they have it relatively flat, but with the interesting thing today, just reading news headlines with tax reform, how's that going to affect the economy in the United States? All right. Mexico. Mexico is an interesting country. When we start looking at not this slide, but the next slide, I think a lot of things that affected Mexico's economy was NAFTA in 1994. China, Canada, and Mexico are the United States' biggest trading partners. Mexico is really strong with assembly plants that make imported components, especially for the automobile industry, and they produce goods for export that's become their trademark. And when NAFTA was signed into law, a lot of automotive plants and other manufacturing plants began leaving the United States and moving into Mexico. Mm-hmm. Part of the NAFTA deal was also to hopefully spur its agriculture industry, and it actually has had a negative effect on their agriculture industry, primarily due to production issues. They cannot produce enough agricultural products for their own citizens, let alone export them to other countries. And when we go into the next slide.
Okay. Just before we do, I'd like to encourage people to pay attention to the scale of some of these slides. Notice that in 2000, at the turn of the century, Mexico has a GDP, when we measure it the right way, of about $10 trillion. But by 2020, we're up about $22 trillion for growth of 120% of an economy in 2 decades is really moving along at a pretty good clip. And so that is one reason why FedEx will undoubtedly have reason to believe that there's plenty of new business to be had in Mexico.
Yeah, it's interesting too when you look at the per capita right around the 2008-2009 mark. You can see, when you compare it to the U.S., how economic slowdown, especially assembling and manufacturing, but they actually recovered pretty well. But if they didn't have the recession, I bet you would see them around the 30,000 mark.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
National savings, it's projected to increase in Mexico so that they'll be able to put money back into the economy to spur growth. Inflation rate is relatively declined since the recession has remained flat.
Right.
Imports and goods and services are pretty much in line with what the United States is doing.
Incidentally, just as we saw in India, we see this increase in saving. And it's really important. The economists publish something called the saving rate, which is the portion of our take-home pay that we don't spend. And that's another very important economic indicator for consumer products and services companies. This is the saving rate that is based upon, as we said, consumer savings and corporate profits. And we know that in Mexico, based upon that GDP per capita that David showed us, and the same in India, that these so-called savings are really retained earnings of industrial corporations. Mm-hmm. And so this is an indicator that there's some pretty good industrial growth going on. And later on, I'm sure you're going to tell us that there's been quite a shift in FedEx's sources of revenue over the years, whereas in the old days they served individuals with letters, FedEx letters. Now their customers are far more proportionately industrial and commercial. And so when we see lines like this with growth in the industrial and commercial categories because of these retained earnings, this says, again, a lot to FedEx. Mainly it says plenty of new business out there.
Yes. Brazil, there's a lot to say about Brazil and really not a lot to say. It's an unstable economy. It really is. And this is where what I talked about earlier, geopolitical factors really play a strong role in how crappy their economy is, to use lack of a
That's fine.
I could use a better word, but it's really not that good. They have no consumer potential. They have no savings potential. Unemployment is through the roof.
Again, for our YouTube audience, we don't mean it quite the way it sounds. Sure, they have potential. I think that what David is referring to is that Brazil's economy, in fact, has been very turbulent and very, I don't know, troublesome. I have difficulty, like David does in finding the right adjective. And when you see these nice straight uniform lines on the chart, you know, you don't get an impression of how tough it is in Brazil. I have a contact in Brazil that I talk to a lot, and I can tell you that the people in Brazil are struggling mightily due to everything from inflation to just plain old political upheaval or turbulence. And that has had a major impact on the economy as well as the value of the currency. And so David is absolutely right. What we see in that brown line is not rising. But Brazil historically has been a real growth engine. And I'm quite sure that there will be a day when it returns to being a growth engine. Pardon me, David, I'll try to cut that out now.
Next slide.
Okay, all right. So in other words, I took it all, huh?
No, that's all right. No.
Look at the unemployment rate. Look at their unemployment
it's
rate.
out of control. It's actually rising. It's rising right now because I had it in my notes and I can't find it. They're the leader of their government. I want to say they call him a president. Is that right?
They impeached the president.
Yes. They impeached the president, and just their political system is in chaos, and
that's right.
It controls the central banks, and it controls imports and exports, and trade and industry. So
there's been a whole lot of
there's no locus of control in that country. So this is the interesting though is national savings are on par with what they are in the United States. They're just not investing it in their economy.
Not a lot too.
Inflation. Their goal is to have a 4.5% inflation rate, and the IMF doesn't even project that being close. And again, it's high due to unemployment, low GDP per capita.
By the way, take a look at where the inflation rate is now, rather than on the right side of the screen. Look where it was last year. It was what about 9%?
Yeah, 9.5%.
So we hope the IMF is correct in its forecast, but don't be surprised if you see the forecast change.
The interesting about Brazil is that they don't have the consumers in that market don't purchase a lot of goods that we do in the United States. They're more of a purchaser of necessities, such as food and beverage, education, healthcare, just basic things that they need for daily life activities. They're not going out and purchasing computers, TVs, iPhones, extra clothing, purses, shoes, and things like that. Brazil is a large country with a huge economy potential, but they don't do anything about it. They're really reliant on foreign goods. And you can see in 14 through the halfway through 16 how imports actually fell in that country. It's because consumers were not demanding extra goods and services. They didn't have the disposable income, and inflation was so high, and employment was also higher during these periods.
Yeah, maybe an equally important factor is the fact that the value of the Brazilian real fell dramatically, making it more difficult for Brazilian firms to import goods from the U.S. and elsewhere. Historically, as you might imagine, Brazil's been quite an export country with coffee and more recently oil. But it was the oil that was the basis for the political turbulence. Mrs. Rousseff, the president that was impeached, was allegedly involved in making deals on behalf of Petrobras, the Brazilian petroleum companies. But while the oil industry was good, that was great for Petrobras. But now the oil prices are so low, it's more difficult. Do you want me to flip the slide, or do you want to keep going?
Just one little thing before we move to France. I still think there is a great potential in Brazil for FedEx, and my teammates will talk about it later. Especially in express service and air service, Brazil, it has the second highest number of airports next to the United States in the world.
That's interesting. Wow.
Well, it's because most of the country is so remote. They don't have a good infrastructure and roads. So most people, it's kind of like Alaska, but on a larger scale.
and with a lot more palm trees.
Yeah, with a lot more palm trees and anacondas. Yeah, but that's something that FedEx, I think they should pay attention to, and it's really, a lot of economists would probably wouldn't mention it, but I think that's a vital factor because they can get goods and services if unemployment lowers, inflation lowers, there's more jobs, the country puts money back into the economy. That may be a potential for a re-emerging market in a sense.
I'm sure you're right about that.
France, again, relatively flat. The unemployment rate is extremely high in France. And I couldn't really find good data why that is consistently high. It's because they're just not really a good producer of goods and services, other than the Airbus aircraft that FedEx uses for their freight.
Certainly Airbus is a great company. There's quite a lot. France is actually a capitalist country, but its government is socialist. And there are historic reasons for that. I spend a lot of time there. And it goes way back into history, and it's nothing we need to talk about here. But France has quite a lot of very substantial corporations. One of the largest pharmaceutical corporations is called Sanofi. They have quite a lot of large corporations. The reason for the unemployment, quite frankly, is political, and we won't go into that either.
Okay. Population growth in France is flat. However, the consumer potential is really good in France. They just probably buy more goods and services within the European Union than they do outside the European Union. Okay. And it's not a strong market for FedEx compared to China and other places. National savings, they got a lot of national savings. Inflation is relatively low, so your dollar will go a lot more in France. Imports and exports are pretty much in line with the United States. All right, population trends, and this is what I talked about earlier. You can see the 2020-2021 where India is getting ready to outpace population growth in comparison to China, where everyone in a sense else remains flat. So I think that's significant for FedEx because that is what we talked about, the market of the future. And just a comparison of GDP valuation and per capita. Again, look at China and look at India in the orange on the graph on the left. I mean, they're just really impressive numbers here. Next slide.
Oh, you don't want to do per capita consumption?
Oh, yeah, we can do. I just put it up there as comparison. It was just accumulation of all what we talked about before, but I just thought it was valuable to put it on a slide together so you can see it. Yeah, the consumer potential, China, again, where they're shifting from a production society to a consumer society, is going to rise, projected to rise as well.
Yeah, its line On the right side, looks like India's and in its own line
Yes.
on the left side.
Yes.
But the growth story on the right side is clearly that red line.
Yeah, and the orange line for Indy on the right side, again, it's because the majority of the population doesn't have extra income
That's
to spend on
exactly
consumer
right.
goods.
That's why we say that China is the growth story for today, and India is the growth story for the future. I did not make that up. That was somebody on the team that presented last night. But I think I'm going to ask them for the publication rights or something. I think it's just a real catchy phrase.
This is just an overview, but we can actually click on to the next slides. There's more detail on those. All right, so this is data from Fred. It's a U.S. Industrial Production Index. This is an economic indicator, and it's going to measure real output for industry in the United States, mainly manufacturing, mining, electric, and utilities such as gas.
All industrial production.
Yeah, all industrial production.
What's important about this? This is really an important slide. Much
Yes.
more than most people would think until they do think about it for a minute. Tell us what why this is so pivotal. Anybody on your, or go ahead, David.
Well, it's not only measuring what is being produced, but the type of, the workers of what are they producing. If you have low skilled workers, your NIDPRO is going to be relatively slow growing because in the United States, manufacturing is kind of in a slack economy, I think, versus where high tech jobs, where you need more skilled workers, is a growing market because R&D and innovation are usually the backbone of a lot of corporations today.
Okay. If you think about market segments for FedEx, there are a lot of ways to segment FedEx's market. But one way is just to describe its customers. And you might do that by putting them in 4 buckets. One is individuals. And in the old days, you and I could go to a FedEx depot and send a letter to somebody or a package to grandma, whatever. But there were a whole lot of individual FedEx letters. The second category would be offices, right? The administrative offices. And they sent a lot of letters like that. Third category would be commerce, commercial, the non-manufacturing, and the fourth might be called industrial. I suppose the fifth then it would be government. So there might be 5 categories. But the categories that are growing the fastest for FedEx are not the first couple. They're the commercial and industrial, with an emphasis on industrial. And so here we see what's been happening to the industrial economy. And lo and behold, boy, in the recession, no surprise that showed up in FedEx's sales charts. Now we see industrial production picking up, but last year in 2016, it sort of topped out. But as we look at this and a couple other charts on and the industrial sector of the U.S. economy, think about what that means to FedEx's market sales potential. I think it'll sort of sober you up.
Yeah. Just like you said, most of their business is I call B2B. That's where their bread and butter is. It's not really to the consumer, but it's business to business. And we never really fully recovered in the United States after the recession. It's just industrial manufacturing jobs are just very, very sluggish. So, when people say, "Oh, we're growing," no, we're really not. It's kind of slack. But just the IPI for December fourth quarter was 104.395. It's really hard to see on these charts.
Yeah, this is consumer goods. Here is the whole nation of the United States, and now we can really see. Look what's happened for the last 2 years. It seems to have settled back down again, and this is the entire U.S. industrial economy, or an indicator of it, industrial production. But this has a real message to FedEx.
It does. It does. It was a good recovery after the recession,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's back to where it's supposed to be at the baseline, and then have hopefully slow growth over the next few years. The total capacity utilization, the rate, is it measures a percentage of resources used by corporations and factories to produce those goods used in manufacturing and other industries.
Yeah, we
It's a
usually
measure of
get
potential economic output.
we usually get a good feeling when capacity utilization gets up over 80%.
Yes,
But here we are down somewhere around 75.
75.7.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it just, when you get above 82, 85%, it's tight, and the prices and supply shortages really could affect it negatively.
And
But,
the demand for new assets, for new machinery
yeah,
and equipment and so forth. That's what really
yeah.
gets production in the industrial sector ramped up to a high level. But at this level, there's not a lot of demand for new machinery and equipment, is there?
No, no. And FedEx should really pay attention to this. I think this is more valuable than the NIDPRO. It's because levels below 80% show that the economy is still in slack, and it is worrisome for them
It is
because it could
indeed.
lead to another recession or even employment loss.
Well, in terms of FedEx, it just doesn't suggest that in this sector, when you put all these slides
Yeah.
together, in that industrial sector, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of growth potential. Now, frankly, the economists who look at these issues will tell you that the U.S. industrial economy does seem to be beginning to pick up pace a bit. But what we have to do is at least be aware that if you were to parallel plot in the industrial production index and FedEx's revenues, or at least its physical shipments, you would find a very close correspondence.
Mm-hmm. The corporate profits in billions from 2000 to 2016 represent a portion of the total income from current production.
Yeah. This is what those industrial corporations pay the FedEx bill with, right?
Yes, exactly. So actually, we did have a good recovery. I mean, the companies are making a profit, or at least they have revenues, I should say. Can't really say they're making a profit, but they do have revenues.
How about the last couple of years?
Yeah.
Little flatter.
Yeah.
Paralleling that capacity utilization chart.
What would be neat would be to put this up against FedEx, because with FedEx, their infrastructure is very, very costly to maintain hubs and airports, and my teammates are going to talk about that down the road here in slides.
Sure.
But, they need a significant amount of capital for acquiring all those things they use to transport packages.
Yep.
I thought this was an important piece of information about manufacturers' new orders, both durable goods and non-defense capital goods. And you can see the dip in the recession and how we've had a good recovery. And I was trying to look for good data to see why we had a little dip in 2016. I think it was just the normal leveling out of the economy to where it should normally be. Or it could be reaction to investment prices. The Fed is getting ready to, or has risen the interest rates, and they're getting ready to do it again. So that may get industry and finance people within industry a little nervous, just a little nervous. All right, interest rates for FedEx. So 15-year corporate interest rates usually is what FedEx uses as debt to fund the purchase of aircraft. And it's advantageous for them right now with an interest rate of 3 points. I think this one is 4.5% for them to buy aircraft. We can go to the next slide, and we'll put all these together. 5-year interest rates are typically used for debt financing for things such as terminals and fleets of trucks. And right now, the first quarter of 2017, the corporate interest rates for 5-year loans is 3.14%. So it's good news for FedEx if they want to go buy, or if they have another market and they want to buy a bunch of trucks where they expand their business. So I used this. It was hard to find accurate projections to what 15-year and 5-year yields were going to be over the next 5 to 10 years. But what I did, I went to the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, and looked at the Federal Reserve rate for 2002 and then forecast to 2027. We're going to use this as a proxy for potential. So you
Okay.
can see that in after 2017, we're going to have another rate increase here soon, but we're going to be back around 3%, which industry needs to pay attention to, especially FedEx when they want to start getting more loans for aircraft, hubs, hangars, fleets of trucks, things like that. So if they want to purchase things, probably now would be a good time to finance things with debt versus capital.
Right. What we're interested in is the shape of the curve here. And what the economists do is they calculate the difference between the federal funds rate, the interbank rate, and the interest rate they're interested in. So back when interest rates were almost zero, the 5-year rate or the 7-year rate might have been 3% or so. So if you take the 3% or the 4%, you add it on to the 3% that it's going to be at 2022, you get a 6 or 7% rate. So it's the shape of this curve that's important here. And you're right, interest rates are going to rise.
Okay, conclusion is that FedEx is directly affected by the state of the U.S. economy. 76% of this business just in 2016 relied on the U.S. domestic market. And that's a weakness as well. I mean, it's good that they have that market, but it's also a weakness because they need to expand internationally because that's where the growth areas are. FedEx has a gradual increase in revenue, mostly due to the increase of international shipping, and their focus should be on India and China. FedEx faces problems when there are severe inflation, hikes, and exchange rates. Since FedEx trades with countries worldwide, interest rates and exchange rates vary in every country. When the purchasing power of its potential consumers is lowered, it affects the organization negatively and vice versa. An incline in the country's economy results in an increase in the use of services of an organization.
Okay.
All their business levels are interconnected and directly related to each other. When even individual consumer purchases decline or even business decline, FedEx transports fewer goods and it affects their bottom line. They need to adapt themselves and adjust with these fluctuations.
For sure. Okay, Anna, where do we go now?
Okay. That was a great segue, David. Thank you so much, and thank you for that detail. I am actually going to review markets with you.
Okay.
So the very first slide we have is on demand. And just as David was telling you and has shown you in great detail, our demand's based on growth in the global economy. If the economy is not growing, we're not growing. Specifically, and in particular to e-commerce, which is the new area that has grown most dramatically. Since fiscal year 16, FedEx has added 185 facility projects, 4 new hubs, 19 automated satellites, and 69 relocations. And this was all due to e-commerce. So it's been pretty significant for FedEx. Their peak season obviously is demand for them, and we'll show you a little bit about peak season in just a second. And then innovation for customers, offering the options for shipping, receiving, and packaging. So David talked about the individual GDP, and of course GDP is the monetary measure of the market value for final goods and services produced in a period. And even though we're not producing a good or a service, we like to move them for them.
Right.
And so this is showing how our world GDP is growing. And thank you, China and India. We appreciate that. So this is a positive thing for FedEx as the world GDP is continuing to grow. So next slide. Okay, so market trends. These are U.S. exports and imports. Based on data from 2015, the United States was actually the second largest exporter in the world. We exported $1.38 trillion in exports. For imports, we imported 2.16, and we were the largest importer in the world. So you can see the drop in the economy and the recession, and you can see that we are recovering from that.
And we call this a trade deficit.
Yes, definitely.
That is the deficit.
The next area, as we talked about, was e-commerce, how it's growing dramatically. There's not a lot of data prior to 2015 because it is such a new area that we're studying. You can see this is a projection through 2021 for the United States for e-commerce. And now looking at this, you would think, wow, this is pretty significant. Keep in mind, the United States is not the #1 e-commerce market. That would be China.
Yes.
They expected to generate $562 billion in sales just in 2015. And 33% of their spending actually occurs on a mobile device, such as a tablet or a phone. So e-commerce is good for FedEx, obviously, because that means they're ordering and we need to deliver.
And for those of you who are informed about this stuff, you know that there are also e-commerce companies other than Amazon. In China, it's called Alibaba. When last summer, my wife and I visited several cities in China. And we had dinner with some folks at a Chinese university in a city called Xi'an. And we were all sitting around the table. And while the guys were talking shop and strategic planning and stuff like that, the ladies were talking about what they wear and what they buy in the different countries. And they asked my wife, first they asked her where she got her clothes and all that sort of stuff. And so she asked them, where do they shop? And they said, oh, we don't shop. We always buy our stuff online. They just either can't get to the store or sometimes the prices are so high. They use Amazon and Alibaba.
That's funny that you say that. I wasn't going to go into that detail, but apparel and accessories actually in 2015 were expected to be close to $100 billion in the United States by 2021. So people are doing more and more just like they're doing, it sounds like.
You betcha.
I think you skipped over my market trends for the world.
I'm sorry. Pardon me.
That's okay. You're trying to make me go fast. That's okay.
No, I just hit the button wrong. I'm sorry.
As you can see, this is a beautiful picture for FedEx as well. E-commerce is continuing to grow, projected through 2020. We continue to see retail growth. We're expecting to see commerce amount to $1.55 trillion and e-retail revenues projected to grow $3.4 trillion in 2019. So we're expected to go another $3.4 trillion up just by 2019. An expected 19% of all retail sales in China occurred on the internet. So China is spending 19% of what they're purchasing on the internet. Japan was also in there at 6.7%. Desktop PCs are still the most popular device for placing online shipping, but mobile devices and smartphones are really catching up as the applications are becoming more user-friendly for mobile devices, and that's increasing from a mobile perspective. Okay, now we can go forward. So,
yes,
thank you. So we had a breakdown of each one of the countries, and we were looking at their population. This is significant because we know in the beginning that FedEx has a majority of their income from the United States. However, if you look at this and you add these numbers, 95% of the world's population lives outside of the United States. Obviously, not all of them, their numbers and their money, just like David just showed you, is not all equal among countries. But this is significant because they are way too dependent on the United States. Fastest growing populations in Asia and the slowest in North and Central America.
When all is said and done, economies really come down to some real basic fundamentals, and people are one of those basic fundamentals, aren't they? You gotta engage in transactions. You got to have the demand doesn't come from robots. It comes from, although it may in the future, but it comes from people right now. And so here are the sources of demand looking at us in this chart.
Okay, so this next slide is related to ecological concerns and CO2 emissions. And this is really applicable as we talk about future plans for FedEx. And my teammate Crystal is going to talk about this in a few minutes. So I'm going to give you just a little information to feed into her presentation. And that is, if you see, the United States has the highest CO2 emissions for all of the world. And this is significant because countries are starting to crack down on guidelines and regulations for CO2, which is going to cost FedEx money. They're going to have to modify their formats for their airplanes. They're going to have to look at their vehicles and look at and prepare for electric vehicles. They actually have started testing some electric vehicles in the United States and using some zero emission vehicles outside the United States. So Crystal will talk about this in just a little bit, but that just gives you a picture of where we stand compared to the rest of the world. Okay, trends. Air cargo levels, as you can see, the pink or reddish colored line, that's actual numbers, and that shows you air cargo levels. You can see as it goes up and down, we mentioned seasonal change earlier for demand. You can see those dips in the red line, that's seasonal change. And then the blue line shows your seasonal adjustment. So if you level it out and adjust seasonally, you can see that air cargo levels are increasing.
They sure are.
Okay, so this, of course, our imports and our exports show us where our customers are. And so these big green dots are where our customers are for imports. Number one, United States, as we know, was number one in imports. China, Germany, Japan, and then the United Kingdom are the top 5 for imports. Okay, and exports, the pretty blue big dots would be our targets for exports. The European nation, China number 2, Germany number 3, the United States, and then Japan. Okay, so vehicle fuel and aviation fuel is a big expense for FedEx, so certainly something we're going to keep our eyes on. As you can see, these are the trends for diesel fuel. We'll see an increase in the fuel expenses as the recession came through, and we see a decrease. And I'm going to show you on the next slide. This is aviation fuel, and we can actually see the major decrease in price around between 15 and 16, and this was due to fracking, and that actually reduced the cost of fuel refinery. So that reduced the overall cost for oil and for jet fuel. So this is reduced cost for FedEx. On the next slide, you'll see an average fuel cost per gallon has reduced. This is a short period of time, but significant numbers for FedEx. As you can see, this shows the vehicle cost as well as jet cost.
Okay, so the cost of diesel fuel for the trucks is the top line, right? And they when folks see this on their screen, sometimes you can't distinguish the colors of the two lines. So the bottom line is the price of jet fuel, and the top line is the price of diesel fuel for the trucks, right?
That is correct. I should have pointed that out. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. So, and a summary from the market perspective, sources of demand, as we can see, e-commerce is our greatest new source of demand. However, we've got to position ourselves in e-commerce. We have to prepare because we have something coming called competition that hasn't been in this arena before. It's called Amazon and Walmart, who've begun to deliver their own products. My teammates are going to talk about that in just a few minutes. We also have to look at our population, and that 95% of the world's population lives outside of the United States. 76% of our business comes from within the United States. So we need to look at expanding past the United States.
Excellent conclusion.
Thank you. Okay, and industrial structure.
Who's up?
Tara and I worked on this section together. This is Renee.
Hi, Renee.
Because this first slide deals with financials, which is what I'll be covering later in this section, I'm going to go over this first slide and then turn it over to Tara to go over some of the models used to assess to do the industry analysis. So this first slide shows some of the important financial indicators for FedEx, UPS, and DHL. As you can see, sales for FedEx lag behind UPS by about $10 billion. However, as Anna mentioned before, FedEx is 63 years younger. Yes, so for them to have caught up close within, $10 billion is a pretty good feat for them.
Oops, pardon me.
That's okay. So As far as the operating margin, you can see that those are pretty comparable. One thing that I noticed is, although UPS's sales are quite a bit higher, their operating margin does not really show that they're taking advantage of cost savings like FedEx is. I would expect their operating margin to be quite a bit higher.
What we have here, not entirely, is the effect of the mix of the business. UPS does have a higher margin. They have, for reasons that are not necessarily related to profitability, but rather buying back stock and the like, a much higher rate of return on invested capital. Better to compare it maybe to DHL in that case. But remember that UPS has a lot more trucks, not as many more as in the past. FedEx, on the other hand, has a great deal more business carried by airplane, by jet. And operating jets, as you might imagine, is a lot more costly than operating trucks. And so the costliness of UPS's business is lower than FedEx just because of the mix of truck business. And for that reason, its margins are higher. And you make a good point. Maybe we should expect UPS to be even higher, but 17% operating margin isn't exactly chopped liver.
Right.
I might add, nor is 15.2%. Those are both good margins. Take a look at DHL, on the other hand, a company that delivers the mail in Germany. Okay, it's the postal carrier in Germany. Needless to say, their profit margins on mail delivery aren't really high, and we can see the impact on DHL. It's the business mix that matters.
Right. As far as the return on equity, one glaring figure up here is UPS is at 206%. I'm sure quite a few of you are wondering how that's really possible. Dr. Roney had mentioned that value line, I believe in one of his lectures, that could have been in a meeting that we had with him, that value line should use an average of the capital,
right,
but uses the beginning balance instead.
The ending balance for invested. Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me. Value line uses the ending. Shut up, Kurt, and let her talk.
So basically, UPS had a pretty large stock repurchase that they did, which affected their net income at the beginning of the year. And
it affected their equity, not their income, their equity. The denominator,
right,
base that they're measuring the growth of, was smaller because of the stock buyback. And in the case of return on invested capital, value line doesn't use averaging. They use a single number at the end of the year, which makes the number that much more wrong. But the problem that we have with both ROI and ROE is that the denominator goes down because equity, which is one of the two elements of invested capital, went down artificially. So the fraction, when we take profit as a proportion of that denominator, is artificially high. And therefore, it's not fair to compare UPS's ROI or ROE to FedEx, because these are artifacts of the numbers rather than how efficient the business is.
right. So the next indicator would be leverage, and we can see that UPS and FedEx are pretty heavily levered. UPS more so than FedEx. A big portion of UPS's debt comes from borrowing funds to do that stock repurchase, and FedEx's debt comes from purchasing or borrowing funds to purchase new aircraft, fleets of vehicles, and as well as the acquisitions, the many acquisitions that they have done over the last few years. So they've acquired several companies, and I believe Anna mentioned TNT, which was one of their more profitable acquisitions recently.
Yeah, when we get to 75%, you kind of wonder how much further they can go safely.
Right. It's very risky. UPS is basically owned by the bank.
Yep. Well said. So this is Tara now?
Yes, we're going to go ahead and Tara. All right, so we're going to take a look at the BCG matrix. We look at this as it's used to help businesses consider the growth opportunities for reviewing this portfolio of products or services and decide where they should invest or where they should discontinue or develop new products. So the industrial sector is where the business or where the action is at for FedEx. Third-party logistics is where the action is at for the FedEx freight. Third-party logistics is businesses that are used to outsource elements of the company's distribution and fulfillment services. The scheduling of the loads for trucks for loads. You see here, Genco is a third-party administrator. FedEx needs to buy as many of these third-party companies as possible. They have competition, and it's just going to continue to increase. And we have ground over in the stars. It's endangered of shrinking right now because of the competition. We have Amazon and Walmart that are coming in. They're beginning to ship their own products now instead of relying on UPS or FedEx. FedEx is not seeing as many stars at this point. They can grow those third-party companies such as Genco to move them over to the stars, which would obviously be very nice for FedEx. Genco doesn't really have a big share because there are companies that are bigger than them, but then there's also that are not quite as or that are bigger than FedEx. FedEx should buy the leader in the company or as many of the small companies as they can to keep inching their way over to actually become the leader in this industry. The goal here for Genco is to grow into a star. Third-party logistics is the primary future of FedEx. The reason that ground is not a star at this point and the reason they are a star and not a cash cow is because of Amazon and Walmart, in addition to UPS or USPS. They're threatening their revenues that are generated from the ground division.
Yeah.
Then we take a look here at TNT. As Anna had mentioned, we acquired them in 2016 to expand over into Europe. Europe's economy is actually growing really slow, but TNT has a good share, so that's really beneficial to them. FedEx needs these ventures that can grow into stars. It doesn't have as many stars right now. They do have India and China, which could eventually grow over into the stars, but it would take the cash from TNT to actually make that happen.
Yeah.
And then we have down in the dogs, you'll see Kinko's, which failed because they weren't really in line with the current operating model.
Right. Is that it? Those are all good and correct comments. One of the other analysts who look at this, I'm not sure I can do this, but I'll try. But, oh, that didn't work. There we go. I'll try it again. No, I can't. You've got it blocked on me. Oh, I know why. Let me see if I can do it this way. Now I bet you I can. Yeah. Others have it over here. And the reason is that normally in a BCG matrix to be here, you've got to have more than half of the market. And this is a growing market for all the reasons that Tara mentioned. But we know that UPS has a little more of this business than FedEx. And now we see that there are some newcomers. So it's a little troublesome whether we put ground here or here. More and I think you can argue both ways. Tara's got it here just fine. But the majority of the cases that I see puts it over here as sort of a borderline star. And that brings it into focus a real strategic issue for FedEx. FedEx has got plenty of cash cows, but it doesn't have any real clear, unquestionable stars. And in order to continue growing, especially as the competition comes into the market from Amazon plus Uber and all these things we're hearing about. And I'm sure we're going to get into that when we get into the five forces. But there's a real question, where do you find your star? And the answer seems to be right here. Because as we know, the real issue is to deploy those trucks efficiently. And Tara used the phrase "trucks for loads and loads for trucks." And these third-party logistics firms, they see to it that there's a load for when a truck takes a load to one city, there's a load waiting for it when the truck is empty. So they serve the shipper, they serve the consignee, and they serve the trucker. And so they're a broker, but it's a very complicated system that they manage. It's not simple at all. It takes all kinds of mathematical programming and the like. And so this industry is growing very rapidly. And the one who wins in this industry gets to come over here. And so the real challenge, the real possibility is that while there's some question about ground, there's no question that if FedEx can build this up and get here, they could be on a catapult to another spurt of exceptional growth. However, as Tara points out, they're just getting going. And there's some other pretty good firms in that industry, and Genco is certainly not the largest. So there we have a real strategic issue for FedEx. What does FedEx do for growth and earnings? What does it do for a star? Right now, it's very pleased that it's got FedEx Ground to provide lots of earnings. But in the future, as the competition steps in, that'll probably push prices down and profits down. So where do you go then for your new source of growth and earnings? And it may just be that third-party logistics, and there's a lot of talk about that in the industry. Okay, pardon me, Tara, I just couldn't resist offering that. Shall I go here?
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right, so next we're going to look at the quarters 5-force model. And there's two reasons that we look at this model. The first one is in order to estimate the profit potential of an industry.
Oh.
And then,
sorry. Pardon me.
And then second, we identify the priorities for strategy. So we'll expand on each of these points in the following slides, but here we'll look at our assessment of the forces in the industry. We'll see that rivalry is high. There's a low threat of new entrants, high bargaining power of suppliers, a moderate bargaining power of buyers, and a moderate threat of substitutes.
Okay, and because I was in your way, would you please repeat the purpose of doing the five forces?
First is it's used in order to estimate the profit potential of an industry. Mm-hmm. And second is to identify the priorities for strategy. Absolutely.
And so what you've told us is that we've got two high forces pushing profit down and a couple of moderate ones. So looks like there's considerable pressure on profitability from these economic forces, right?
Correct.
Okay.
All right, so the rivalry we've got is high, and that's because of the mature industry. It's very asset intensive, airplanes, the fleet of trucks, and the distribution centers. There's high operating costs. It's difficult to compete on price except via cost reduction and price increase. We need both low cost and differentiation, and there's high exit barriers.
Yeah, once you own a fleet of aircraft, you got to do something with them. It's not like you could just, take them down to the used car lot.
That's right. All right, so then we got the threat of substitutes as moderate. Email became a substitute for the FedEx letter, and we're thinking in 15 years, drones will likely replace the pilots and truck drivers. So therefore, we have to be the substitute. We have to find ways to stand out and differentiate ourselves. Power of suppliers, we got that as high. Banks supply the capital needed to purchase those fleet airplanes, build the distribution centers. We have to rely on the airplane manufacturer, the Federal Aviation Administration. We have to have the landing rights at the airports, fuel suppliers, and the Teamsters Union. Our pilots are unionized within FedEx.
Yeah, let's see. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay, so we'll put another one in here. The Airline Pilots Association, right? The pilot union too.
Correct. All right, the bargaining power of the buyers we have is moderate. There's low switching costs for individual consumers. Corporate business has greater power due to purchasing volume. Power is higher if the customers can provide their own shipping services, such as Amazon or Walmart, which are already leaning towards shipping their own packages. And it's likely they might only rely on FedEx if they kind of become overextended and they have to have a little help to get everything out.
Really good point about Walmart for sure, and now Amazon.
We have the threat of new entrants is low. There's high startup costs. Economies of scale exist. It's difficult to match global presence of existing competitors in the industry. So the factors we have to overcome is the differentiation, leading technology, and superior customer relations management. DHL failed in the U.S. market because of their lack of fleets, but obviously they're doing well in Germany right now, but they couldn't keep up in the U.S. market. So all in all, Porter's Five Forces tells us that the profit potential in the industry is moderate. The priority is on low cost and differentiation, as well as getting good deals from our suppliers.
So the overall forces on profitability, you judge to be, what did you say, moderate?
That's what we had.
Oh, no, that's okay. Just trying to, I want to get a summary for everybody here. So it's difficult to make a profit in this industry, but the challenges are not insurmountable. But we're going to have to compete with both differentiation and low cost because of rivalry. And somehow we're going to have to recognize that the banks and the aircraft manufacturers and the unions, we're going to have to strike deals with them so that we can keep operating on an acceptable basis. And then we always have to be looking at this possibility that there will be some new business model, some new means of conveying packages and freight. And your example of drones, I think, was just great. But there certainly is a fair number of challenges in this industry that strategy has to deal with. And the reason I'm pursuing this with you is because here we are with that second purpose. These are the areas where FedEx's strategy is going to have to come to grips. Okay.
All right, so now we're going to take a look at our critical failure factors. Unreliability of delivery. Obviously, we want our packages to be delivered on time. That's what the customers expect, and that's what they basically what they expect of it. The poor maintenance of fleet. Obviously, if we're not maintaining our fleet, it's going to cost us a whole lot in the long run. Inability to offer global services. More and more customers have operations worldwide, so they're going to have a one-stop shop, so to say, and they don't want to use FedEx here, UPS over there. They want to be able to go to the same company. Cost management, and then lack of employee training. We want to make sure that they're safely and properly delivering our products out to us, which again will be costly for our company if not.
Okay, those are good points about FedEx, but remember that this is part of the industry analysis. And so these are critical failure factors for any company in the industry, right? Not just FedEx. These could trip up FedEx, they could trip up DHL, they could trip up UPS. These are the critical failure factors, and if you can't avoid them or overcome them, you're just not a contender. I bet you're going to talk about critical success factors now.
You got it.
Okay.
We got superior customer relations management. Customers can manage the progress of tracking of the packages. Superior speed of delivery. Online pickup scheduling for our customers.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about FedEx's capabilities, right? Who's doing that?
Renee.
What is that?
Okay. I'll be discussing the capabilities analysis.
Okay. Go for it. Oh, this is just your menu?
Yes, can you please
Okay.
move to the next slide? Okay.
Let me know when you want me to flip the slide.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
On this slide, we really are just showing the revenue by segment, revenue and operating profit by segment. As you can see in the first graph, Express is a pretty good contributor to FedEx's revenue. It accounts for 54% of their overall revenue. Ground accounts for 34% and freight for 12%. If you take a look at the operating profit though, while Express does account for 54% of revenue, it only accounts for 48% of overall operating profit. And Ground, although accounting for only 34% of revenue, accounts for 44% of their overall operating profit. So the cost for Ground has lowering the cost for Ground has been a main focus of FedEx, and it looks like they've been pretty successful in doing so because their operating costs in that segment are quite a bit lower.
Are you guys going to show us the difference in the operating margin of these different groups?
The difference in the operating margin?
Yeah, the profitability of each of these groups?
Well,
as it turns out, the Ground has an operating margin of about 13.7%, whereas Express, as I recall, has something like 9.8%. So there's a substantial difference in the profitability of these groups.
right.
And, you know, that's why FedEx has been buying so many trucks, right? Because it really wants to have as much of this as it can get because it's really profitable. It costs a lot less to run a truck than an airplane.
Right.
Or did you want me to flip it? You didn't tell me to flip it.
No, yes, please flip it.
Oh, okay.
That was one of the points that I was trying to make as far as the Ground segment of FedEx.
Mm-hmm.
Here we have the trends from 2007 to 2016. We can see that sales followed many other presenters in 2008, dropping due to the recession. Heard that many times. But they also, sales, return on equity, and operating margin have shown a pretty good uptick since 2010. And notably, leverage also has, because of the debt that was mentioned earlier that they've taken on to acquire several companies and replace their aircraft and fleets. In this restructuring, that really plays an important, or the cost of restructuring for FedEx, really plays an important part in their risk, because the more debt that they take on, the riskier it is for investors.
Good point. You didn't tell me to flip it, but I flipped it anyway.
Still thinking. Here we're going to start talking about the strengths and weaknesses. One of FedEx, or some of FedEx's strengths are a strong global presence, diversified business options. They invest heavily in technology so that they can be, or try to be ahead of the competition. They do have a good customer relations management, and customers' ability to track their packages and things like that. Their reliability, did put the percentages in there to show the reliability is 88% versus UPS at 91%. They seem to think that that's a pretty good reliability rate, but if 12 out of 100 packages don't end up where they should be, or on time, or damaged, that's not a very good rate. They also are very strong in their advertising and marketing.
What an important point this is. FedEx publishes their track record on speed. You may be getting into this later. but they claim to do a lot better job in getting things to their destinations quickly. This is what Paul Harvey called the other side of the story, isn't it? We don't. We had a couple days ago in another one of my classes a review of this case, and that team just banged away, repetitively at the speed claim. But there was nowhere in that presentation about the other side of the story. So I'm glad that you brought it up, Renee. And this is not a slam on FedEx. FedEx is a really impressive company, but it is important to get the whole story.
Right. Weaknesses of FedEx. They're.
This is the first time I've heard FedEx called a small company.
Right, and it's really not. I mean, they bring in $50.4 billion, but
UPS is 20% higher.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
20% larger.
Right. Their ground deliveries lag behind UPS due to their focus right now on express, which David mentioned earlier. Express is number one, but they're second to ground. They're second to ground to UPS in the United States.
Yeah, and in Europe, DHL has the number one spot, UPS number two, and FedEx number three. So I think that your second bullet is especially important.
I did skip that one.
What we have seen in the first part of the presentation about what's going on in all these nations is that the cheesecake seems to be in other countries, in other regions, other continents. And so without those kind of competences internationally, that's an indication that there could be trouble down the road. No surprise, therefore, that FedEx, and you're going to tell us about this, but just recently acquired a significant company in Europe to strengthen their position there. And it didn't solve the problem because that basically gave them another cash cow. But if they hadn't bought TNT, then their weakness of not being strong in Europe would have put them in peril. So they had to pay the big money to get TNT so that they could still be a player. And the result was there went their leverage, right? So this was a real garter snapper of a decision for Fred Smith. Do I pay this much money? Do I get in order to get another cash cow when I really need stars? Okay, but if I don't do it, then I'm not a major league player in one of the biggest markets of the world, which is Europe. So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Right. Okay, we included a critical success factor report card. We excluded DHL because they're really not competitive in the U.S. As Tara mentioned earlier, UPS and FedEx are larger competitors with one another, specifically in the U.S. Some of the categories that we included, the top four are pretty important. Well, all of them really, I guess, are. You can see that FedEx is lagging behind in global service. But in technology, we graded them a little bit higher than UPS. They do invest a lot of funds in improving technology and innovation. Leverage, we saw earlier, UPS is quite a bit more levered than FedEx and is reaching a point where something's going to have to give. They're becoming a very risky company to invest in. Speed, they're about neck and neck. I think their average delivery is about 17 seconds difference in the speed of delivery. It's something kind of crazy. Yeah, UPS lags behind FedEx by about 17 seconds.
Okay.
So we do have FedEx slightly behind the UPS, and that's really, to me, I would say mainly because of they don't have a strong international presence, a global presence, as strong as UPS. They are working on that in their acquisitions, such as TNT, as we've mentioned several times.
I agree with your assessment, Renee.
Thank you. Long-term financial goals. I kept the information from 2007 to 2016 on these.
Good. Good.
So
that's the way to do it.
We can see that really sales and their margin returns are going to follow along the same path as they have historically. You can see the margin returns graph that there is a steep increase from 2013 through 2016, and that is due to the funds that they're borrowing that they borrowed to fund all those items that we've mentioned before.
While you're checking your notes, one of the things that strikes most people when they look at this chart, and this, I presume, is Value Line's forecast, but there's a forecast for a decline in operating profit margin and return on equity, which would parallel a decline in earnings. Did you happen to come across any explanation of that?
I did not use Value Line's forecast.
Oh, you did not? Okay.
No, I did not.
Okay.
These are our forecasts.
That's completely acceptable.
I know why I'm lost. I didn't misplace my notes. They're actually on the next slide.
Okay.
I probably could have included them at the bottom like I did the other slide, but if you'll flip to the...
Okay. Well, just before we do, we see that leverage comes down.
Yeah, because
that's impressive and necessary. And then the capitalization, the composition of capital, and we can see that equity builds and the debt comes down as we see before, and that's why the leverage comes down. But a nice graph because we have everything all wrapped up. Rather interesting way to put the operating margin and ROI and ROE on the same chart. So whatever your source is, you're going like gangbusters here. But I hope you can tell us why that reduction in profitability in the current year.
Revenue is projected to increase by 40%.
Yeah.
The year
Yeah.
2021.
It wouldn't surprise me if what we've got, and this is just a surmise on my part, and I may not be correct, but remember that the mix of business makes a great deal of difference. And FedEx has just acquired TNT, you know.
Right.
And that has Europe is less profitable than growth markets and less profitable than the US. Also, we have the exchange rate problem in converting euros to dollars, which would make the profitability come down again. And then we have FedEx buying a great big bunch of trucks. They're also just bought 18 jet aircraft, but they're buying truck companies like they're going out of style. And so the truck companies, initially, those businesses could be, exceptionally or less profitable until FedEx gets them, to a more efficient level. And just because they've got those new jet aircraft, the jets are more expensive to operate than trucks. So I would say that TNT and the dollar exchange rate would be my first, culprits. And then I would take a look also at the mix of business, more business maybe with those jet aircraft, which are a little more costly to operate. But my first indictment would be the TNT and the exchange rate.
Yes, and that explains the sharp increase from 2016 to 2017 in sales, because they absorbed the revenues of TNT when they acquired them.
Right. Okay. Yes, no, what?
So,
Are we staying here or moving?
yes, please. As far as the leverage, we plan to reduce the debt by 1.5% per year, or $200 million. The only thing that really, or one of the main things that threatens that, is the rising interest rates that are projected in the coming years. So we may not, FedEx may not be able to meet the goal of reducing it by quite that much if interest rates do rise.
Well, if interest rates rise, they're going to want to get that debt down, because for as long as it's so high, that interest rate's going to be impose a cost on them that's going to imperil their profitability. So getting the debt down will lower their exposure to increasing interest expense, right?
Right.
Okay.
So if they can decrease it by a larger percentage, that would definitely be beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
Return on investment projected a steady increase to 16% by 2021. This would mainly be due to a projection of increased consumer spending and venturing into emerging markets. And then return on equity increased to 21% by 2021. Can move to the next slide. FedEx has been able to maintain a competitive advantage by the use of new and innovative technologies such as sense-aware technology, which allows consumers to track their packages. If it's an item that needs to be refrigerated, they can monitor the temperature, and it's really advantage for FedEx over UPS, because as far as what I've researched, UPS does not have this type of technology. Dr. Roney, are you aware of whether UPS offers anything similar to this?
No, I am not.
Okay.
UPS is famous for having been the innovator in using something called linear programming, and another one called, two of them, dynamic programming and transportation models, to optimize the route structure that their trucks take. And the result was a substantial reduction in cost, which is another reason why its profit margins were higher than FedEx for a while. FedEx obviously eventually got the idea, and they started doing it too. But UPS has had a reputation for being a technology leader. But FedEx's management is known to be very aggressive.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't surprise me at all if they stepped ahead in sensing technology. It would be perfectly reasonable, but I do not have a specific answer to that.
Okay. FedEx also has a university that promotes the development of new innovations, and they have a really strong focus right now on cost reduction.
Yeah, that university also teaches people how to operate everything from FedEx terminals and depots to just to train management. They do a whole lot of training in that place. I'm not sure, but I think it's right across the border from Memphis in a place called Olive Branch, Mississippi. Do you want to flip?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Continuing with their competitive advantage, as we've mentioned, they own a large fleet of aircraft, monster fleet of trucks, and they're venturing into 3PL with the acquisition of Genco. Got primary future highlighted there because that is certainly going to be an area of interest for FedEx moving forward. and it's just where the growth is for their freight division. And they also have sophisticated tracking functions.
There you go. That's one of those mathematical IT devices, and they're very, very good at that, aren't they? Has anybody ever called FedEx to track your shipment?
Yep.
You can, if you're a customer, you can find out exactly where it is, and
Yeah,
when it's
or just use your smartphone.
Yep.
Okay. To summarize this section, their sales and operating profit are steadily increasing, which we've projected to continue. Return on investment, return on equity declined in 2012, but they've been steadily climbing since 2013. Their debt is high, not so much in relation to UPS, but it is still high. But their investment in their equipment, their CapEx investments, and their acquisitions will ultimately increase their profits.
Right.
And then, just to drive it home, whoever responds first to the constantly changing environment wins. They've got to be the substitute. They've got to implement the drones and acquire the 3PL companies to avoid the increase of those threats of substitutes.
What a cool conclusion. That was a good one. Let's see, there was something in here. Just a sort of a footnote. This long-term debt, yes, indeed, FedEx and UPS both have a lot of it. And now that interest rates are rising, they have an incentive to get it down. But for several years now, there's been a sale on money. Interest rates have been really low, and if you can get 15 or 20% return on investment, and it only costs you 3 or 4% to get the money to make that investment with. Let's see, I can borrow it at 4%, and I can get 16 to 20% when I invest that capital. 16%, and I only have to pay 4 of it back. I guess I'll do that. I guess, will you do that? I'll do that. As long as we don't get too risky in the process by getting overboard. And that's the real issue now that, and as long as the economy stays stable, so will FedEx's cash flows. But if the economy and those markets that FedEx is in all over the world get a little turbulent or a little uncertain, then that risk could come home to roost. So at some point, even though there's a sale on money, you just gotta, realize, not let your eyes be bigger than your stomach, right? And it's the same whether you're drinking too many malted milks or taking on too much debt, or whatever it is that you eat or drink too much of. Who's up?
Okay.
That would be me. This is
Okay.
Crystal. Hey, everybody. I get the awesome opportunity to be able to take everything that my teammates have put together with all their research and talk about the strategy that FedEx is going to utilize to make all this happen. And then at the end, we'll talk about implementation. So we can move on to the first slide. First of all, we're going to talk about the domestic growth strategy. With the domestic growth, FedEx plans to focus on their 5 overall strategies. They want to grow their core package business. They want to grow internationally. They want to grow their supply chain capabilities, grow through e-commerce and technology, grow through new services and alliances. And I apologize for the phone.
I thought that was my phone.
No,
I
sorry.
was jumping to go answer the phone and hang up on it.
Okay, we can go on to the next slide, Dr. Rooney.
Okay.
Okay, the next
That
thing.
was your guy. I was going to say that was your dial-a-friend, Crystal.
It was my mother, actually. What a wonderful time to call. So the next slide, we're going to talk about international growth strategy. And of course, as we've talked about through this whole presentation, we have seen that FedEx really needs to do their international growth. With this slide, we're talking about we have 95% of the world's growing population outside of the U.S. And FedEx obviously has a great opportunity to be able to expand their business. Establishing new business in other countries has lower cost, and it's a little easier design to roll out because FedEx has what we call a cookie cutter system and allows for the globalization. So with the cookie cutter system, it is a great success for them. It's been a great format for them. And it allows FedEx to roll out quickly. They can make their decisions centralized. They're using the same software across the board, and they can operate all their terminals in the same way. So they can just kind of put it out there and let it roll pretty quickly. Okay, next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about international growth, since this is something we're really looking for in our strategy. FedEx is set out to acquire companies outside of the U.S., and we know they've already been looking at that and doing some of that. FedEx identified countries with high population and growth to expand. We already talked about India and China, which was a biggie. They also acquired Multipack, which we haven't talked about here, but Multipack in Mexico, which is going to allow them to grow quicker. And they've opened a distribution center now in Latin America, and opened a Northern Pacific hub in Japan, which was going to improve the connections that they have with America and Asia Pacific and Europe. So they are already moving in those directions, and they need to continue to do so. With this slide, we're going to talk about the ANSOS growth matrix, and just to kind of identify what this is. It's a strategic planning tool that business can use to provide the framework to help their executives and their managers, obviously, to devise the strategies for their future growth. And it includes your market penetration, your service development, market development, and diversification. So first of all, when we look at market penetration, we look at it in the established markets and the established services that FedEx has already. With that, they want to grow, like we just talked about, they want to grow that core package, what they've already had in place. They also want to be able to advertise, do some more marketing and initiatives. And then also, they definitely want to do their continuous quality improvement with their customer service, because customer service relations is a really big thing for FedEx. They really like to make their customers happy. Let's go down and look at the new markets and established services under market development. And with this, you know, obviously we're wanting to go into international areas and take the services that we already have that we talked about with the cookie cutter and move them out internationally and open more of those terminals and distribution centers.
There are some other examples that we could put in this particular cell. When we went to China, for instance, with, let's see, the acquisition of, oh boy, now it escapes me, the Flying Tiger, there we go. That was one of the first major acquisitions, but it made them an international carrier, and they were in China with Flying Tiger. More recently, and you're probably going to talk about these acquisitions later, but another one that just stands out is Prakish in India. And so when, and of course, we just talked recently here about TNT. So every time we go from the US to another country market, of course, that's market development. And FedEx has sort of made a habit of that, right? That's been one of their major growth strategies.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Moving over to the top right-hand corner, we're going to look at service development, which will be for our established markets and then with new services. They want to grow their supply chain capability, e-commerce and technology advancements. And of course, one of those big items, and our, you know, the team has talked about this several different times, mobile technology is a big one that we need to be tapping into with new services right now. Going down with new services and new markets in diversification, we want to create some new delivery options. We want to look at, just like we said earlier with the mobile, but we also want to look at the drone technology and also start working with the, I didn't put it here, but the automatic driving, the trucks that drive themselves. So that's another technology. And then obviously we want to diversify ourselves by creating those alliances and acquisitions and putting some new type services in play. Yeah.
There's often a discussion that arises about GENCO and 3PL. And some folks want to say, well, 3PL is still in the package or parcel delivery industry. It's a facilitator. Others say, no, it's a whole new industry because it's not a trucker, it's not a consignee, it's not a shipper, it's something altogether different, and it's a whole new industry. And you can make an argument either way.
Yep.
What do you guys think? Here, I'll push the escape button, and I'll type it in. Tell me where to put it.
We actually talked about this last night, guys. I think we were talking about it under diversification. You know, we talked about it in different places, so we kind of didn't list it because we weren't really sure exactly where we wanted to put it. But
it's a conundrum.
mm-hmm.
But since you seem to like it here, and I do too, sort of, because it is a whole new industry. So we'll put 3PL right there. Whoops. If I can learn how to use the all caps key, there we go. Now we've probably got a more complete exhibit there. So pardon my interruption, but this 3PL thing is going to be really important in this case.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Okie dokie. Are we moving?
Yes, you can move on now.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. I just want to do what I'm told.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, you're doing a good job.
Okay, thank you.
The next slide we're going to talk about is development of competencies. This is really important for FedEx because they need to be the leader, especially in the innovation category. They want to get as much competency in their business as possible to make sure that they move above UPS. So when we talk about these, we have 4 different areas that we discuss, and I'm just going to give a brief definition of each one so that the audience knows what they are. The Premier Plus 10 really answers a question about what new competencies that we should build today to ensure that the company remains a premier provider for the future and especially over the next 10 years. So we want to get ourselves out there.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. And then we want to talk about the next one is fill in the blanks. And it asks the question of what is the opportunity to improve our position in existing industries and to better leverage what we already have in competencies. And then, of course, mega opportunities ask what new competencies will our organization need to build to participate in the most exciting industries in the future. And then white spaces ask our organization what new products or services could we create to redeploy or recombine our current competencies. So with that being said, looking under the new and existing for Premier Plus 10, we added here that new competencies added for new technologies to build innovative technology systems and to obtain those through some more acquisitions.
And we've talked about a couple already in this conversation. Now you got some of this over on the right side, but I think the self-driving truck is definitely it's not a conjecture of whether, it's just a conjecture of when. And most experts see this stuff coming a little faster than expected. Trucks sooner than cars, right? Cars are risky because, you know, the people are involved. But if you put a truck on the road that drives itself and all it's got is packages, folks are probably going to be a little more cavalier to do that. And I would imagine that those sensor technologies that we were hearing about from Renee earlier are right there because the idea is to keep the trucks from banging into each other, let alone banging into a car. But sensor technology and self-driving trucks would probably be the kind of thing we're talking about there.
Yep, absolutely. And going back to the sensor technology, you know, one of the things that is really good with that is that, you know, for the healthcare industry where they have to ship a lot of refrigerated items, pharmaceuticals, that's really a push for them to use FedEx because they can monitor the temperature inside those packages to make sure that they're okay and they didn't get tampered with or whatever. So that's a big area for them.
What a great illustration that is.
Okay, so let's move over to the right and we'll talk about new and new, which is under mega opportunities. Mobile technology competencies. We keep hearing that over and over in this presentation. Obviously, it's a big thing. Everybody's using mobile technology with apps these days. We need to make sure that we've got the appropriate people and the knowledge in place that can put those technologies together for us. Same thing, we just mentioned drone technology. We talked about the driving trucks, but drone technology, we really need to push that because Amazon is already using, starting to beta test that drone technology. So, we need to get on the forefront of that and try to get ahead of the game. And here we go with 3PL. Obviously this is 3PL is big. We've talked about this throughout the presentation as well. And we need to, that's a mega opportunity for us that we really need to be moving forward with. When we go down to existing, and we look at fill in the blanks, this is to use the use of existing core competencies brought in from an acquisition to enhance advancement. So, bring in what we can to help us move forward. And then white spaces, the drone technology, air delivery, and the auto-driven trucks. That's what's for the future coming down. So those are obviously the two big ones for FedEx.
Those are our existing capabilities that we can put into new markets or new industries. To be candid with you, normally what folks do is talk about the lower row first, because those are the things that are not the big step out from our, what we already can comprehend. But then when we get into that new competence row, that's when things get a little more exciting, just a little more imaginative. Let me just throw you a question here. What is it going to be like when you put self-driving trucks with a 3PL system? Okay, so we take two of these ideas, the new competence, all right, the self-driving truck, and we've got a logistics system that sort of plans it all out for you. What you have is sort of a great big automated system with fewer people.
Absolutely.
A lot fewer people, and frankly, a lot more reliability. Now, who's going to be the most competent to pull something like that off? And if you say FedEx, you're probably wrong. Is it somebody like Apple or Microsoft or somebody else in the technology industry? Okay, I mean, we've got Amazon partnering up with Uber right now, right? So, and I'm probably already stealing your thunder, and I should cut that out. But the reason I bring this up is because normally, and I think we probably did this in class, I asked you a couple of questions. Where is the risk the lowest on this chart? Where is the risk the lowest?
Fill in the blanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, we understand the industry and we understand our current competences. So that's not okay. And where is the risk the greatest? Do it again, David.
Mega opportunities.
Bingo! He's right again. Yeah, because everything is new. The industry's new and the technology is new. So you've got the most opportunities to stub your toe. Now, it goes on, and I'm doing this for the audience that isn't here with us tonight, but this could be something like you might find on an exam question. It's just possible, okay? You never know. But where is the reward likely to be the least? Take a shot, David.
You said the reward likely to be the least?
Yeah.
Oh, the white spaces.
Which one?
Oh, I'm sorry, Premier Plus 10.
No. It was fill in the blanks, though, right?
Oh, yeah, fill in the.
Yeah, existing. Okay, and where is the payoff, the reward, likely to be the highest?
Well, yeah, if Mega Opportunities
Mega.
pans out.
Mega
Yeah.
opportunities. Okay, so we've all heard this saying of the one way or another about risk and reward, right? With greater risk comes greater reward. If you step outside the box, if you innovate, and you hit a winner, chances are you're going to get rewarded for that. But if you don't hit a winner, you're just going to end up with a boatload of cost, right? And a bunch of egg on your shirt or something. It's gonna be embarrassing. On the other hand, if you hit a winner by improving your current practices, just by continuous improvement, filling in the blanks, that's going to improve your profit margin. I mean, you could get rewarded for that. But if you're thinking about, a great big mountain of cheesecake and grabbing the brass ring, that you gotta take the risk. You gotta go for the mega opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, well, one thing that was real interesting, I won't take much time on this, is that you were talking about Microsoft or Apple. What would be really interesting is to see maybe a FedEx kind of team up with a Microsoft or Apple to use them to help them move forward.
She's learning. No, that's exactly the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And if FedEx is smart, they're already talking with them like that.
Yep.
Okay. This was a divergence. It took us a few minutes, but I think it was a really good teaching moment. And that's what these cases are for. And I guarantee you that if you read a case about FedEx, nobody else is talking about teaming up third-party logistics with sensors and self-driving trucks. Okay, that came out of this session uniquely.
Yep.
So right now, you know more than a whole lot of people who think they know a lot about the FedEx case, just because it occurred to us here.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Okay.
back to you, Crystal.
Yes, sir. And this slide, we're going to talk about their differentiation. And I did get that word out, and it's really difficult to say. FedEx does use the service differentiation method to make them stand out as the best shipping company and increase profitability. And some of these that help with that is that they're at the top of the global express delivery, which we've already discussed. They provide the most support, money back guarantee, and capability to pick up packages from homes. That's good customer service. They invested large amounts on logistics and operations for their transportation system, huge amounts of money for that. And of course, all of these above that we've just discussed automatically pulls together an outstanding quality for them. And, I wanted to point out on that particular slide, if you're not the first, you are the last. A little bit more about diversification is that they realize the importance of diversification in their business pretty early on, and their significant economic value is received through economies of scope, and by that they get a cost reduction. Services can be combined through all of their departments, and they have synergies that can be obtained by combining their services together.
Works for me.
Let's split this out and talk a little bit about related versus unrelated. On this slide, we're going to talk about related diversification. Two of the areas is with FedEx Ground, and they use their FedEx Express original business model. That's why they're related. And this is for delivery of packages that are done via ground shipments and on trucks. And then when you look at their FedEx Freight model, they also use their original FedEx Express model. And this is for delivery for the larger shipments via freight trucking. Now we're going to look at the unrelated diversification. So this is where they're moving into different types of business related. FedEx Office, which was part of the business that was bought from Kinko's. It was completely an unrelated business model to FedEx, and I think we've discussed here that it was a flop. But you win some, you lose some. Most of the stuff was a win for them, so they tested the waters to see what they could do with it. And then another unrelated diversification area was their FedEx Trade Networks, and it provides worldwide freight forwarding services that integrate their air and their ocean. It provides customs brokerage, trade and customs advisory services, and other value-added services.
And this is almost a necessity. It's called multimodal, and DHL is the strongest multimodal freight company. That is, it handles ground, air, and ocean. FedEx has never been in ocean, but here now they're doing forwarding. That is, they put it on somebody else's ship. It's, you know, when they deliver with their own airplanes or their own trucks, they have it all under control. But when they put at Prakish, if they put a package on a railroad train and send it through to someplace in India because the roads are poor and they don't have airports all over the country that can handle FedEx planes, and FedEx will put it on a railroad, on a train. And since FedEx doesn't have its own ships, they do forwarding. They put it on somebody else's ship.
Of course, you know, another big one that we've talked about here is Ginkgo. You know, the 3PL, their supply chain. It was bought out by FedEx and delivers a diverse portfolio of the logistics challenges and core competencies and develop their brand. Of course, we've talked about, you know, this is a real big area where strategy for FedEx is going to come into play, that we can push this forward in our organization. And then the other one, which I thought was really interesting because I'm a techie person, FedEx Tech Connect, I thought was a really interesting, unrelated area of business. You know, I think this is fairly new for FedEx, and not sure if this is going to be a flop or not, but this is a solution that eliminates the hassle of configuring, repairing, and refurbishing business technology equipment. FedEx actually has this on their website, and I thought it was pretty interesting. But this kind of goes in the unrelated area as well. So that'll be something to look at to see how they do with that business. Okay, the next area is horizontal integration. So, you know, we've talked about, throughout the presentation today, we've talked about some of the acquisitions that FedEx has already done, and they utilize horizontal integration to increase the size of their business and, of course, get economies of scale. And, of course, when they do that, they're getting rid of their competitors. So it helps them to bring more underneath them so that they can hopefully be the best of the business. And, of course, some of the examples we've already talked a little bit about: the acquisition of TNT, which provided a larger European presence for them. It opened a lot of doors there, and it gives them some better competition now with UPS. And then, of course, the acquisition that Dr. Rooney mentioned earlier about Flying Tiger with the air freight, that was also another one. This was just a pretty little slide I found that kind of gives you an overview. And this isn't all of them, but it gives you an overview about some of the acquisitions, and acquisitions equals growth. So they have learned that throughout their ventures as they move forward with these companies, and they're testing the waters on those little other areas that they've seen to flop. But they're, you know, most of their acquisitions have been very successful. We've got, you know, we've already touched on Tiger International. We haven't mentioned Caliber System. We've mentioned Ginkgo, the multi-pack I mentioned a little earlier, Kinko's, the Flying Cargo, Bongo. So these are just a few of them, and it's got the years in which they did their acquisition.
That's a very cool slide.
I thought that was too, yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit, shift our gears a little bit and talk about the organizational decision-making process. So we know, you know,
pardon me, forgive me, Crystal, are we moving into implementation now?
No, not quite. We're going to talk a little bit about organization, and then you'll have another section on implementation.
Okay, but we're out of the strategy models then, is that so?
Yes, I think that is.
Okay, let's talk about something real quick just before that. Earlier, you talked about the cookie cutter model. Mm-hmm. And next to it on the slide, it said global. Global standardization, I think. And in your discussion, you explained how everything, when they put in another unit around the world, it's basically the same as all the other units in cookie cutter. But what we don't have here is a slide entitled International Strategy Model. right? And they're in, I forget the chapter that it's in the textbook, but we have talked about the international strategy. International is the cookie cutter. That's the Hilton Hotel, Hyatt Hotel. Everywhere you go, it's basically the same, and the design of the product or the service is concentrated at headquarters. All the strategic decisions are made centrally, and then we just put wherever we put a business, it's the same around the world. The opposite is multinational, where every business is different because people's tastes for food and clothing differ, culturally and geographically. Then we have the global standardization, which is like an amoeba. It's a unicellular organism. It's a great big system. We might drill the oil in different parts of the world. We might take it by different means, whether it's a pipeline or a tanker or a truck, to the refineries, where the refineries are located wherever it's most economical for them to be located. Eventually, the refineries take the gasoline or the jet fuel, whatever they make, and distribute it, maybe in gas stations or whatever. It's a whole great big system of interrelated parts, but one product comes out, very standardized products like gasoline or chemicals or semiconductors. And then you've got this combination of at least two of those things, and that's called transnational. So usually we say if it's globalization and it's modified to meet the local requirements, then if it's got a little bit of both. An example would be McDonald's, where you can get a beer at a McDonald's in Germany and France. You get shrimp burgers in Japan. You get tofu burgers in India because they can't eat hamburgers, and so forth, right? So those are the four models. Now, the question is, as you described this cookie cutter approach, which one of those models, which name is most appropriate for FedEx?
We discussed that it was global.
Okay, now you said cookie. The reason I wanted to get this ironed out is because you said cookie cutter back on that earlier slide.
Right.
Then we said global, and that's not a cookie cutter. Different parts of the world have different assets, all to do this one unique thing. Now, I think you're probably right. So the point is that it may be cookie cutter, but we put these assets, whether it's a distribution center or a location that does sorting or warehousing, or it's just a base where we have our airplanes or our trucks located. We put them around the world where it's most economic, but we provide the same service worldwide. You think that comes close to describing it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and I've done this for the people who are not attending the meeting, and we wanted to make sure that if they saw that word globalization back there on that earlier slide, we understood that that was the international model you're talking about. But cookie cutter all by itself doesn't get it. We've got to appreciate that these assets are located around the world selectively where it's most economical to do it. They don't have a hub with airplanes in every country. They put those regionally where it's most economical to do it. Okie dokie, now we can move on. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Thanks, Dr. Rooney.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll switch our gears just a little bit and talk about the organizational decision-making model for FedEx. And of course, this is, obviously very important because it determines how they can be a competitive organization. And based on, the review and research that we've done, we consider FedEx using a matrix structure. And with the matrix structure, which I thought was really interesting, the teams work on projects and are moved around the business based on their competency level. So if they're working on a specific type of product that requires, for example, the mobile technology that we were talking about earlier, they pull in those folks that are most appropriate or have the most knowledge around that particular project. And in this type of organization structure, you see that the people most of the time have two bosses. And sometimes that can be an issue, you know, for staff. But one thing I thought was really great about FedEx is that they kind of mitigate that with being able to provide a lot of reward systems and competing with, you know, giving them bonuses, things of that sort. And it also helps with the monitoring and supervision of their employees because their managers can't supervise them as well because they're moving around the organization. So it kind of keeps people engaged. It keeps their staff moving and focusing towards quality and getting them up to a standard of being the best in the business. So that's kind of how we had it laid out. And when we go to the next slide, we'll kind of give you an idea of what that matrix structure looks like. As you can see here, just to point out at the sections that are called DSMs, that stands for departmental senior managers. And then underneath those are the team leaders, which there's where your two bosses lie. And then underneath the team leaders are your team members. So this will give you kind of a overall view about how they're set up.
Another way to look at the matrix is just to put a two-dimensional graph in your head, or a 2x2, something like that, or just a square. Down one side, we have the corporate functional executives, and we see them up at the top, the marketing person, the HR, general counsel, we have operating vice presidents, chief financial officer, and so forth. These are the corporate officers that handle the basic functions wherever they are performed in the world. But then we've got these division senior managers, and they're running individual businesses. That's on the other dimension of the matrix. So we've got a two-dimensional matrix. On one side, we've got on the top, maybe we've got the corporate vice presidents who are calling the shots financially, marketing. They decide what kind of trucks are going to be used, what kind of airplanes are going to be used, and so forth. Make a lot of the basic decisions that affect everything, and they give orders sometimes that reach right down into the organization. But then people have to be responsible for the operations in all these different locations, and sometimes they're called presidents, sometimes they're vice presidents. In this diagram, they're called division senior managers, but they have the geographic responsibility for these different businesses, right? So we have two dimensions of managerial authority, and that's why we have that two boss problem, because somebody inside the matrix can get it from two directions. And that makes it very complicated. But as Crystal points out, sometimes it's the best solution when you've got so much going on, which is true in FedEx.
Yep. And I think, you know, just to point out that I think this structure will help push them over into the more competitive area above UPS because of the way they manage or how they handle projects, because this structure will allow them to push that project out a lot quicker. And also one thing to note that you just said, and it triggered into my head, was that they do have that, you know, that big structure at the top, but they have all those different companies, little companies underneath, and those companies or those presidents, so to speak, or whatever, can make their own decisions about that company, and they can, you know, strategize, you know, do different things for that specific type of area in the company. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well.
Good point.
This slide just kind of gives an overview of their global organizational structure. Just kind of points out where they are in the different 5 regions of the United States, Canada, Asia Pacific, Europe, Middle East, the Indian subcontinent, and Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean. So that just kind of gives you an overall view about where they're connected globally. Okay, so now we've got all these strategies that we are thinking about doing, and now we got to implement those. And first of all, we're going to talk about the projects and programs that are currently underway with FedEx. So some of those things include just recently in February of this year, they launched the FedEx, the FedEx Fulfillment e-commerce solution. We talked a lot about e-commerce today. They did that for their small and medium businesses to help fulfill their online orders. Also, I believe Anna, spoke about the zero emission the ecological areas, and they have introduced that for all the all-electric Nissan vehicles in Belgium, which helps reduce the carbon dioxide emissions. And then they've also launched a new flight that's linking TNT's European Air Hub in Belgium to the FedEx hub in the US, which is really important. And then I didn't get a specific month on this because they didn't list that on their website, but they're planning on this year launching the use, which I think is really big in the innovation area, of their alternative fuel, their jet fuels. And they're going to be using algae, tree pulp, and scrub brush for those fuels. So that was pretty interesting. And then a few more includes the purchase of their new fleet of aircraft, which we've discussed already today, building new terminals during expansion into those other regions. And of course, we want to continue the expansion into Europe. And we've already mentioned that SenseAware package monitoring technology, which is something that they have put into place and are trying to get off the ground now. So what is it going to take? What's the requirements that it's going to take for these programs and projects? They're going to need to continue to enhance their software systems for online orders. They need to keep up with the newest technologies, obviously. Acquire their competence with their alternative fuel sources. Decrease the threat of the spiking oil prices. Movement to drones and self-driven vehicles are going to require that competency that we talked about earlier. And they need to establish relationships or acquire businesses that can develop the new mobile technology. And also, we mentioned earlier about possibly having some venture with Microsoft or Apple. So that may be something, that we would need to require to get moving with those as well. What's the recommendations for the future? This slide, we talk about we want to focus on the mobility again. That's the big thing. You saw the rise with the e-commerce piece that Anna was talking about earlier in the market. We want to keep on top of that. And, we also mentioned the competition coming. We got Amazon that's beating on our door right now because they're working with Uber. I think they've started doing some beta testing, and they're working with them to establish their own system.
It's more than beta testing. They're up and running.
Oh, very good. So,
well, it depends on your point of view.
Yeah, absolutely.
FedEx doesn't think it's very good.
No, they don't. So they got to move forward, and which kind of goes into the second bullet in, how can we help that? Maybe we want to establish a FedEx subscription service to compete, maybe with Amazon Prime like they have for online ordering services. So that they'll use FedEx. Walmart, we mentioned Walmart earlier as well. Walmart's starting to look at how they can do their own shipment without using other vendors as well, or other suppliers. And then the last bullet we've got that we want to acquire some more smaller companies and increase that market share and eliminate that future competition that's coming. Again, we want to continue to expand for the future outside of the United States. We've got that big area of United States, but we need to move forward outside of the United States, particularly into China and India, which we talked about earlier. Continue to work on that drone air delivery. Again, we talked about Amazon already working on drone air delivery, so we need to move forward with that. Work toward the auto-driving trucks for ground services. We want to invest a larger investment on the research and development of new technologies. We want to utilize our university that we have, get that competitive advantage. And of course, acquire more 3PLs. That's the way we need to move in our business. And we think that's the way of the future, and that's going to get us into that star area. So,
just one other item that I might have put here, and that is, build the business in India, because as we said, China is the growth market of the present and India is the growth market of the future. So since FedEx is there, it's just a matter of exploiting and developing this favorable position that FedEx has, so that as India's economy grows, so does FedEx there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, and then I'll be brief on this because we've kind of covered all this, but this is our summary and conclusion area. We know by past experience that FedEx has done very well with growing their business and acquisition. So we need to keep continuing to do that. We know that's good for us, and it helps eliminate our competition. Their innovation and expansion of new technologies has been useful in making sure we're differentiating ourselves in the market. We're establishing a large footprint that helps to eliminate the competition. New innovative technology keeps us ahead of our competitors. FedEx is a complementary industry to all other industries. That's a biggie. I talked about earlier about the healthcare industry with this new smart sense or sensor-aware technology. That's a really big area to market in, I think. E-commerce is a major catalyst to the economy and vital growth engine of business. So if you're using FedEx, you have convenience.
Okay. See. My golly, Crystal, you really covered a lot of ground on there. That was a beautiful review of strategy and implementation. Wow.
Thanks.
Really, really good. Let me see if I can get us back together here. And looks like Lisa has joined us. Jamie's still with us, and Wendy has arrived. Hello, everybody. What a good presentation that was. One of the things that you did not include specifically was a section on goals, where we would have the goals hierarchy, where, in that I don't know how to do it here, but where is FedEx located, and it really would depend upon where in the world you're talking about. So FedEx is jockeying for a favorable market position in Europe, obviously, and that's why TNT. And it really, you could even get more specific. Are you talking about air and international service? Are you talking about domestic? Are you talking about ground or air? In the U.S., FedEx has certainly got a stronger position than it does in the Mideast and China, where DHL has a stronger position, and so forth. In the U.S., you might even be thinking about long-term growth and exactly how you do that. But I think you guys have given us some pretty good ideas with such things as 3PL. But I would have liked to see a growth table, which, and but you, Tara, I'm sorry, was it Renee, gave us the financial charts that took us through the trends, which we usually find in capabilities, and then the projection forward that we usually have in goals to identify exactly what we're going to look like when we're successful in the future. I think we get all that from what you've given us. We just have to look at Renee's charts twice instead of once, but it's all there. The FedEx case is so complicated, so multifaceted that sometimes in the work that I do and the work that folks like me, maybe you don't think there's anybody like me, but folks who are in the same line of work anyway, we do what are called future studies and contingency planning. I think you heard me talk about that in lecture 4. So what would be fascinating, and you were not asked to do this, nor was any other team, but to now take this thing forward, to ask yourself, to make a picture of what is the vision? What will FedEx look like 10 or 15 or 20 years, let's say in 2030. What will FedEx look like if it's very successful? How will these? We know that there are other people who are developing automated vehicles. We know that Amazon has come in as a competitor with Uber. We know that eventually airplanes are going to fly themselves and trucks are going to drive themselves. We see this business of the possibility for the involvement of technology firms that aren't even in the industry today. This thing could unfold so that the business environment is very unfavorable to FedEx, because FedEx does not have the driver's position in Europe, where it's trying to stay a contender by buying TNT, but DHL is a 10,000-pound gorilla in Europe. And it is in the Mideast, and I'm sure I told you the story, but my son is a West Point grad, and he was in Iraq during the war. And so for his birthday, when he was over there, he's a great golfer. He won he won a championship, the Ohio Junior Amateur Championship. That's how he got to West Point. He was on the golf team. So anyway, I sent him a sand wedge for his Christmas present, and because I knew he'd be in the sand, you know. And but I couldn't get it there by FedEx, and but DHL was the only company that could get that sand wedge to him, and it did. So he got his sand wedge for his birthday, and DHL brought it to him. So you've got to wonder, you know, where the growth is in the world. And I think that that's why it's so very important for FedEx to exploit this opportunity that it has in India, and then do what it can to exploit its strength, you know, flying tiger. FedEx is a force to be reckoned with in China. It's not the only force to be reckoned with, but these growth markets are really going to make a big difference. So you could paint a favorable and optimistic picture on the one hand of the business conditions that FedEx is in. On the other hand, you could paint a picture that's not nearly as pretty, you know, where you've got these competitors that are acing it out in technology and the like. And then given these two pictures of the business conditions that FedEx could look forward to, you would then ask the question, now, what are the strategic priorities here? What is it? How should and how do you imagine that FedEx would respond to those business conditions strategically? And every once in a while, I have actually asked a discussion question just like that. Maybe it'll happen again this time. I'm not sure, but it certainly is a possibility, right? Okay, and if that should happen, Wendy and Lisa and Jamie have really scored big here, because if you get hit with that question by, you know, unaware, it's kind of like having somebody like at the Super Bowl games where they drop the bucket of Gatorade on the coach, right? Like, what was that? So anyway, I thought you did a marvelous job. It was a very interesting case. And you put a new spin on the ball in a couple of places, and I pointed out where you added some things that, and we came up with this idea of 3PL with self-driving trucks. And at some point, could even be that you got systems dictating the routes of self-flying airplanes. You know, so there's a future out there that doesn't look a whole lot like the industry does today. So you could almost imagine that this industry has reached some kind of a turning point, and that the changes are going to be dramatic. They're going to have some big impacts on earnings and the folks who own the stock in these companies, right? And that's why we'd like to prepare for more than one contingency, depending upon how these things play out. Okay. My golly, we've been here for quite a while, haven't we? Thank you very much for your resilience and staying the course here for a really interesting session. Does anybody want to add anything or ask any questions or and anybody in the audience? Jamie, Lisa, Wendy, anybody who we don't see who's there incognito?
Yeah, I guess just real quick, I'd say I thought you guys did a great job, covered a lot of ground. I just had two, I guess, a comment and a question. I guess my comment is I was surprised that.
Turn your camera on, Jamie.
Yeah, it's off. Sorry.
No, turn it on.
Oh.
Join the party.
All right. Here
Wendy,
we go.
you and Lisa can do the same thing if you want. Come on in.
So I guess, I mean, I do quite a bit of e-commerce, a lot of Amazon, eBay, all that kind of thing. And I would say I'm surprised that FedEx is as close to UPS as they are. I would say that packages that arrive here, probably 1 to 10 are FedEx compared to UPS or USPS. And I guess that's my other question is, did you see that USPS was a competitor in the domestic market? And I apologize if I missed that earlier in the presentation, if you guys covered that. But I was kind of wondering if you saw them as a competitor, especially in the domestic market.
That is a really good question. Among other things, it raises more than just the question that Jamie asked.
Mm-hmm.
Can FedEx be a least cost competitor?
Mm.
No,
It's hard.
it's hard for them. Their overhead's so high.
Yeah.
They can be a low cost, but not a least cost competitor.
Good point. Okay. And can FedEx or UPS be a differentiator? And the answer is yes, but it's hard as hell. Okay. If you're talking about trucks, like Jamie's asking, trucks come up to Jamie's. Jamie works for, as I recall, a medical products company. Is that right, Jamie?
That's right. Biopharmaceuticals.
Okay, biopharma. And so he gets lots of, and a truck that says UPS on it doesn't operate a hell of a lot different than a truck that says FedEx. And if DHL were still here, it wouldn't be any different than a DHL truck. And the same for shipping products by air, although FedEx does what it can. FedEx claims to be faster than UPS, and it tries to differentiate that way. But if you think of it, it's really hard to differentiate in this industry, and it's really hard to be the least cost competitor, because truck is a truck is a truck. Aircraft you can get a little difference with. Where does the differentiation come from? Stuff like sensors and stuff like 3PL, right? Meanwhile, we haven't answered Jamie's question, and that is, is FedEx really an equal match to UPS or U.S. mail service, right? U.S. Postal Service? That's probably the least cost competitor, right? Because they don't have to make a profit.
Right, and they have different levels of, speed, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the United States Postal Service and FedEx is that they use each other
Mm-hmm.
when there's backlogs.
Yep.
Especially during the holiday season. And that might be another opportunity for FedEx, is that the USPS uses various companies to transport mail, like across country into different regions. They contract that stuff out to the lowest bidder, since it's a government agency. Maybe that's something FedEx can tap into the market to, maybe underbid the competition.
As a matter of fact, FedEx now has the U.S. Postal Service make its deliveries to consumers, right? That's a separate, there's a name for that, and I forget what that name is.
B2C?
It's a FedEx, got a FedEx Act.
Custom critical?
Postal, that could be it, postal critical. But in any event, USPS delivers stuff to homes now, whereas in the past, I can remember when FedEx delivered packages to my home. Have you all had a FedEx delivered to your home?
Yes.
Yes.
And now it doesn't happen anymore, does it? But UPS will deliver to your home yet.
But what is interesting that we discussed about just yesterday was that, like I order textbooks through Amazon instead of the UMO bookstore. And I've had all three modes, USPS, UPS, and FedEx, bring books from Amazon. So I don't know, it's what distribution center is coming from is who they pick.
That's right. That's right. But very difficult to get differentiation, right? And by definition, Amazon, and now you kind of wonder where Amazon's going to be in the future, right? Because it looks like they're starting to do that. And Uber is able to bring stuff to local markets quite easily, at least in the big metro markets. And by the way, one last item, simply don't forget that this is another indication here where the U.S. Postal Service is delivering to the homes for FedEx. FedEx is not the FedEx that it was 25 years ago. FedEx in the past will deliver to a home and a small business. But more and more and more, FedEx is looking for the large customer, the industrial and the commercial account, and to the biopharmaceutical businesses that are growing so rapidly.
But to your point there, when they hand it off, it's kind of like the forwarding you mentioned earlier. It's out of their control, and that's definitely been a problem with services like Amazon Prime. The 2-day guarantee is kind of out the window when they hand it over to USPS, because you lose another day there a lot of times, and like I said, it's out of their hands.
Good point. Jamie's done it again. He really got us going here. He raised the good question.
Well, and another thing, going back to what Jamie was talking about real quick is, we've seen around here, in fact, we know somebody that is a contracted service through FedEx that delivers locally to homes. Because, I get packages here from FedEx all the time. And we know those folks, and he has his own business, but was contracted with FedEx. So I think that's kind of the way FedEx is moving with the home deliveries.
Mm-hmm. And that is outsourcing, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And the intent is to keep the cost down, because if they've got to use their own assets, those assets are very costly. The driver is the least of the cost. It's the cost of owning and operating all of those assets. So if you can outsource it, so much the better, because you're really trying to catch bigger fish here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What an excellent discussion this has been, and I really mean that. I think you guys, gosh, I'm glad you were willing to do this so late in the show. By the way, don't look for this YouTube to come up anytime soon. It's going to take a long time to convert this sucker. But my compliments to you for a very interesting presentation. And I'm delighted to compliment all of you who participated in this discussion. It just made the thing that much better. So at this point, I think what I'm going to try to do is wind this down. Shall we end it for tonight? Is it time? Somebody's got to go to the bathroom. I know that.
Oh, yeah.
That would be me.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I can just, I'm going to end the meeting. First I've got to do one thing. I've got to stop the recording. We've got to stop it.